So here we are with session number 3 of the training program. In particular, today we will focus on the way to build a solid narrative on recycling. What are the do's, what are the don'ts of recycling, the potential of recycling, but also the limits of recycling. Let me make some preliminary statements first by way of an introduction. We may say certainly that recycling is not enough. It is not perfect. We need the resources and materials that we lose across the recycling chain. So it's not meeting the perfection, definitely. So we may call it Plan B for sustainability. Certainly Plan A for sustainability would be a reduction and reuse, because we would avoid production of waste altogether and all the needed resources and energy which are needed in order to recycle it. However, recycling is important. It is important because it helps us reduce the amount which we send to disposal, and to a remarkable extent. And also it has got the largest potential for zero waste programs in the short run. If you want to dramatically reduce the amount of waste you send to landfilling right away, implement a recycling scheme. That's what you may do already in your local communities. Also, it takes along an educational impact, because by separating materials, people are getting more focused on the proper management of different types of materials, different types of stuff, or also on new purchasing habits in order to reduce the total amount of waste that they generate. And also it is important because it helps us create jobs and therefore livelihoods for local people, for local communities. So it is important, not enough, but important. So we need to get the balance right in building the narrative on recycling. Certainly, I would say we should have to skip a narrative that says recycling is our main goal. Probably it is not. In the longer run, definitely a reduction should be our priority. But also we equally have to avoid a narrative that always words recycling as greenwashing, as scrap. This is not acceptable either. Recycling certainly can give us a precious contribution when it comes to local implementation of zero waste programs. So I would say, in a summary statement, we need better recycling and also upstream solutions. They are not fighting each other. They may stay together in a consistent and comprehensive zero waste plan. We know that in zero waste programs, we want to stick to a cascading approach. We always try to target the best possible use of each and every material. Then if the best one is not practicable, we may settle for the second best, for plan Bs and then plan Cs. For instance, just sticking to plastics, if we consider plastic bottles, first of all, we may consider replacing them through refill and reuse systems, for maybe supported by deposit refund systems as well. If this is not possible, we may consider closed loop recycling with separate collection, so turning plastics into new plastics. And closed loop recycling means making the same stuff from a waste material. So it would be bottle to bottle. If that's not practicable for whatever the reason, a lack of local markets, a lack of local technologies to do that, not a good purity of the plastic bottles we collect, or we have got commingled collection of plastics, we may still consider downcycling. For instance, we may turn plastic polymers into new plastic items, such as floorings, benches, tiles, bricks, and so on and so forth. We will go back to it in a while. But certainly there are some numbers that have to make us reflect on the limits of plastic recycling around the world. Because we know the plastic producers, they want to lead us into thinking that we may endlessly recycle plastics, with no problem. But the bare truth is that the recycling rate of plastics in the world is currently around only as little as 15%. And on historical basis, since plastics were first produced quite a few decades ago, only 9% of the total plastic which has been produced has been recycled. Sometimes the recycling rates may be higher. For instance, packaging plastics, which are targeted by what we call extended producer responsibility. Extended producer responsibility is a regulatory strategy whereby the producers of a certain item, in this case, packaging materials, have to take on the burden of that item at the end of its life. So municipalities, communities can make separate collection and give the burden back to the producers. Of course, since the producers have to fund the scheme, this is the best contextual condition in order to increase the recycling rate of such plastics, because they themselves may be interested in maximizing recycling, minimizing the hard to recycle plastics in order to minimize the cost for them to manage the problem. But still, the fact is that only 40 to 50% of packaging plastics in Europe are actually recycled. So once again, we are nowhere near a total perfection of the recycling system. Also, we do have the problem of the so-called scam recovery. So many of the low-grade plastics, the low-quality plastics, after separation of the high-value polymers, typically PET, PP, HDPE, all the other polymers, since they are of little to no value, they get basically loaded on ships, on trucks, and they get shipped elsewhere around the world, as it was the case in many Asian countries, and above all in Southern Eastern Asia until some time ago. So basically, it's like using the Global South as a dumping ground. They say they go there for recycling, but we know that this is small companies, just picking the few plastics which are actually recyclable, and then they put anything else in the dump site, which is subject to wind drift, and so plastics are going around in the countryside, or they burn them, which causes noxious emissions. So this is something we should be avoiding. But anyway, you have realized we have been discussing plastics so far. We also have to consider how big is the contribution of plastics to total recycling. Because if we say, is recycling working? Recycling doesn't only pertain strictly to plastics. When it comes to organics, we may basically recover 100% of the separated organics through local home composting or community composting programs or centralized composting schemes. Of course, in an industrial composting site, they will have to get rid of the impurities, but typically the impurities in a well-designed and well-performing separate collection systems are a few digits percentage, maybe 2-3%, and all the rest gets recycled into a fertilizer. The same for paper. Most of the paper, the separately collected paper, is actually recycled. The same for glass. Glass is basically all recycled once it's separately collected. And I would say, even if we collected PET bottles separately, most of them might be recycled. The problem is that when we collect plastics, we collect commingled plastics. And so we do have PET bottles, but also we have got PP bottles, we have got polystyrene trees, we have got trays, polystyrene trays, we have got yogurt pots, we have got crispy packets, we have got a wide array of different types of materials and stuff, which makes them much less recyclable as a whole, because we also have the low value polymers and materials. However, let's consider what is the contribution of different types of materials to total recycling. Because definitely organics worldwide are the largest contributor to the total potential recycling rates. And we have just said that organics, once we implement separate collection of the organics, are basically totally recyclable into a compost, basically. Then comes paper, and also paper is totally recyclable. Then comes glass, and also glass, once we implement separate collection system, is basically totally recyclable. So the part of waste which is showing problems with recycling, which is plastics, is not one of the largest contributors to total recycling rates. This is why we cannot say the recycling system as a whole is broken. The plastic recycling system is, it is showing large imperfections, and therefore we need to rethink it in order to improve the overall management of the situation. Because we know that plastics, most of the times, they do not get recycled. They end up in dump sites, they end up in waterways, they end up ultimately in the oceans, and therefore they contaminate our beaches, they contaminate our food web, they contaminate fish. And this is something we cannot afford because of the loss of beauty of our places, because of the loss of value in fishing activities, because of the health problems for the communities affected by the problem. So we need to address the problem through a more comprehensive strategy than just considering recycling. First of all, we have to consider that 40%, even more sometimes, depending on different parts of the world, 40% of plastics is packaging plastics. And this is typically one-way, single-use plastics. Half of that may be reduced by means of redesigning and reuse almost right away. So first and foremost, we have to consider a mid and long-term strategy which prioritizes reduction and reuse through redesigning of packaging materials, through redesigning of single-use materials we have got in our hands, through redesigning of business models. Also, we know we do have in our zero waste systems the 4 R's strategy. We have got reduce, reuse, recycle, and then we have got the 4th and most powerful R, which is redesigning. So redesigning is actually what makes zero waste as the optimal strategy in order to address problems with waste management. Because we can check what is left out, what is left behind in our residual waste. If it is made of materials which are hardly recyclable or not recyclable at all, we can consider redesigning the system in order to phase those materials out or to make them into materials that may be recycled or composted or reused. This is a summary chart of a study which was done globally by an international expert panel to which I contributed about the potential strategies in order to address the leakage of plastics into the environment and in particular into the oceans. We can see a few key points and follow me in explanation of this chart. First of all, you can see that with business as usual, the total amount, the global amount of single-use plastics would basically be twice as much in next 20 years or so. So passing from 220 million tons to more than 400 million tons. And that would be the main problem. Also, we can see that with a consistent combination of strategies, which include reduction, substitution, recycling, better disposal, controlled disposal, we may minimize what goes under the wording of mismanaged amount of plastics. Those are the plastics which end up in open burning, in dump sites, in the countryside, and that causes also ocean pollution. So with a combination of that, we may consistently reduce the leakage of plastics into the environment. The third important point is that the largest contributor to the total reduction of the problem would be the reduction of plastics. Basically 30% of the total solution would draw on the importance of plastic reduction. So first and foremost, we always have to prioritize reduction above substitution, for instance, compostable plastics, which only make sense in a few specific applications, or recycling, or final disposal, controlled disposal. So if we want to address the issue, what is our toolbox? What is the set of tools we do have in order to address the problem once forever and to have it sorted out once forever? We have got a long-term strategy, which has to be based above all on reuse and reduction. For instance, we may allow the so-called bring your own systems, whereby the consumer may take his own cup, his own tableware, his own cutlery for food providing services, or for at bars to have the coffee to go. Or we may consider product as a service, which is a new business model, whereby they don't sell us the stuff, they rent it out. For instance, a reusable cup for your coffee to go, so you can grab your coffee at a certain bar, then you can walk with your coffee or your beverage, whatever, and you can give the cup back to the same bar or another one the other side of the city. This would be product as a service. So we are only purchasing the coffee or the beverage and not the cup. The cup is given back, then it gets sanitized and it may be used again and again and again. These all may be supported by the so-called deposit return schemes. So they put a little levy on the materials, the reusable materials, so the consumer will remember it's better for him to hand the cup back after it is used. Also, we have to reduce the hard-to-recycle plastics. This is the direction which is being taken by many international initiatives, such as bans in the single-use plastic policy, which was adopted by Europe. Now there are other countries which are following the same regulatory pathway, such as Canada, China themselves. They are considering similar initiatives. So if there are materials which are hard to recycle, and they typically end up in the environment, on our beaches, in the countryside, such as the straws, 99% of the times they are totally useless. And so we can get rid of them, we can ban them, but for disadvantaged people, people with illnesses, they may need the straws, but it may be their own straw, which may be reusable. No need for one-way straws for common people. Then we have got the transitional solutions. We may improve recycling. Recycling is not enough, we said, but still it is important. It has got a role in our zero waste vision, in our zero waste strategies. We may certainly support the markets for recycled materials, for instance, increasing the use of recycled polymers. We may mandate an increase in the use of recycled polymers, for instance, through the so-called minimum recycled contents. So you may define sector by sector what is the minimum percentage of recycled polymer that has to replace virgin polymers. For instance, the percentage may be particularly high in the automotive sector or in the IT sector, the computers, the mobile phones. We may use recycled polymers instead of virgin polymers. Whereas with food content materials, sometimes we may use smaller percentages. But anyway, this may support a higher absorbing power by the potential market for recycled materials. And if recycling is not working properly, we may consider transitional solutions as downcycling. What is downcycling? For instance, I'm pretty sure you have stumbled upon proposals such as precious plastics. They tell you, okay, you did the cleanup, we have got marine litter or beach litter. It is made of a large variety of polymers. There is no possibility for high value recycling. Well, by means of comparatively simple technologies such as extrusion or injection molding, I will not go down into details, but it's basically, blending different types of polymers into a new composite polymer. And then you can make different materials. You can make eco bricks, you can make tiles, you can make floorings, you can make pots, benches, whatever. Or another one, the plastic roads. So using plastics instead of asphalt. Of course, there may be downsides, and we have to watch out. We have to watch out because this is not a perfect solution. Of course, since we do know that plastics release microplastics, this may be releasing microplastics. Since we know that plastics include some compounds which may be toxic, this may release toxic compounds, of course. So first of all, we do not have to use it for sensitive applications. For instance, the toys for children. That's not a sensible application because children would, you know, touch it with their mouth, which would not be safe. But also, we have to consider a few things in order to assess whether plan Bs are acceptable or not. First and foremost, we always have to assess each and every proposal against the usual practice in the local context. So if we have got better solutions, such as closed loop recycling or a local product as a service scheme, why should we be promoting plastic roads or downcycling by means of extrusion? We have got better solutions. But if the local contextual situation brings heterogeneous plastics towards the dump sites, which gets on fire every other week, well, it's better to have it downcycled, for sure. Also, we have to consider these only as a transitional solution and not as a long-lasting fix of the problem. The long-lasting roadmap towards the final solution should be a reduction of the total production of plastics. So if such proposals are brought forth by those who are producing plastics just to trick us into thinking that we may keep using and purchasing plastics because they have found a fix, no, that's not acceptable. It's only a transitional solution, and only as such it may be considered. Also, it is acceptable only if it is proposed by local small enterprises and or in community-based schemes, and not by big corporate companies. You know, if ExxonMobil comes there and says, well, don't worry, you may keep using the polymers which are produced through the oil we get from the ground, because we have found the possibility to continuously recycle such plastics into plastic roads. No thanks, sir. That's not the final solution. So it is not to be considered as a way to justify production of plastics and to keep the so-called business as usual model. In any case, such solutions should never weaken our efforts for a longer-term strategy based on reduction and reuse. That's the golden rule, and we always have to consider that. So consider also the possible lock-in effect. You know, lock-in is when there is a certain technology which requires to be fed with a continuous tonnage of a given material, of a given waste. That's the typical case with incineration. So if they say, okay, we can get rid of plastics, why not building an incinerator or a gasifier or a pyrolysis site? Well, that would lock us in the need to feed into that particular type of site for next couple of decades. Whereas we want to work on the higher levels of the zero waste strategy. If it is extrusion, you know, you have seen it's comparatively simple, the technology, and so it is not likely to cause any lock-in. We only use it as long as we still have got the problem of overproduction of plastics, but in the meantime, we have to work on the higher levels in order to reduce the total amount of plastics which are being produced. So I think with these few notes, you will certainly be able to define your own roadmap, which will have to consist of recycling, certainly, because recycling is not enough, but still, but also the main priority in the longer run, which will be reduction and reuse. Thank you very much.